Hello, hello. Welcome to episode number 6 of Think Out Louder. In today's episode, we have something really intellectual, exciting. We essentially want to attempt at breaking down some of the biggest objections to Bitcoin that exists. We keep hearing from Twitter, from YouTube, all these different objections. There are questions, there's answers. We wanted to essentially break it down and make it easy for you guys to understand, and hopefully to make it interesting enough for you to get into Bitcoin, or at least like and subscribe to our podcast. So here it goes. Enjoy the episode. Today's episode, since crypto is a very hot topic for our audience, I thought this will be an interesting episode to dive a little deeper in Bitcoin. I don't want to explain. I didn't want to explain what Bitcoin is per se, because a lot of people have a fair idea with it. But I just want to talk about the biggest sort of objections of Bitcoin that constantly keeps coming up. And from the looks of it, you guys also are sort of aligned, and you guys think that this needs to be discussed, right?
Yeah.
I think many of the fears about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin economy and stuff are sort of overinflated, and I think this is a good opportunity to address all of them and our viewpoints on them.
Yeah.
I think it is one of the most underrated payments system in place, and there is a lot of fear around the term crypto and Bitcoin because of the volatility that you see on the demand side of things. But underneath it, there's a neat little software which can revolutionize the way we work with money.
So the first major objection to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general is that if Bitcoin becomes really popular, governments will ban it.
I think from day one, Bitcoin has had the issue of regulation and government bans, and we have seen that Bitcoin has gone through both of these at different stages in its life. The one defining factor through all of this is that it has survived. No matter regulation, no matter it being banned, I think the founder or the founders, whatever you may think of Bitcoin, had this intrinsic property built into Bitcoin that it cannot be destroyed by a centralized force, and therefore decentralization is so important to understand within the Bitcoin blockchain. This decentralization not only of power but of the fact that of the mining and the usability as well, or the users of Bitcoin, it's all decentralized. You'll have to wipe out the entire blockchain to wipe out Bitcoin.
That's not even an option. So for the audience to understand that, so Bitcoin is also a currency, but more importantly, it's a network protocol, right? So like the internet, it exists everywhere. So the only way to put an end to the network is if you switch off the internet. Not in one city. You can do it in one city, so they won't participate in Bitcoin, but you have to do it globally, everywhere, which is obviously not realistic. Like the internet is everywhere. So anywhere that anyone who has a computer and is connected peer to peer will have access to Bitcoin. So it cannot be stopped that way.
So it can't be attacked by an external force. So it's supported by a global network of nodes, which are computer process, which is actually processing power from computers and graphic processors to help in its transaction. So it's supported globally through this network, and unless every single node, which is I think about 14,000 or 15,000 nodes, goes down simultaneously, as long as even there's one single node, there will be a ledger of every single transaction which has taken place in this network.
Pretty much. And the other way that governments can ban it would be to stop mining or ban mining, because mining is a way to sort of create new blocks and to verify transactions, right? And we know that China did it as well. Like, that was the biggest scare for Bitcoin last year when China completely banned mining. But just a few months after they banned mining, the amount of network sort of like activity came back to its original level before the ban happened. So Bitcoin stood against the Bitcoin network stood against that China ban as well.
I think a concept here which is really good about Bitcoin is the anti-fragility of Bitcoin. It actually becomes stronger the more people try to beat it down. It's just because when a centralized power tries to attack something which is purportedly good for individual people, more people notice it, and therefore the block becomes stronger because they join. So it has the opposite effect. Some of the countries banning it has actually helped Bitcoin reach where it is today.
And this comes to the very cool idea that I heard recently, where someone in a podcast compared Bitcoin to like a Trojan horse, and this is one reason why banning might not work, is because Bitcoin right now, there are like 200 million users who own Bitcoin globally. 200 million is a huge number, right? So in those 200 million, there's probably government officials, there's probably bureaucrats, there's probably like oligarchs or like institutions, extremely rich people and wealthy people. All these people now are in the game. They're invested in it. So in trying to ban it might actually not be an option, because these influencers would not allow it to happen, because they'll essentially be like killing their own monetary incentive. So at this stage, and it's going to be worse in the future, as in more people, more money, as more money flows into the system, the likelihood of like governments banning, especially democratic governments banning, would be like very, very slim. So the government banning is we spoke a lot about it. Now, what about the criminal activity? So the second biggest objection is Bitcoin is and was used by criminals because of the anonymity of the network, because it's not hooked onto the traditional finance system. A lot of criminals use it to sell illicit stuff and to do a lot of illegal activities. I don't agree with it, but do you guys?
I think in the early days when Bitcoin was starting to get popular, and it was used for illegal activities. I think the famous incident was the Silk Road incident in China, where about $1 billion of transactions was sent through for drugs and trafficking and whatnot. So when in its early days, when it was not recognized globally, there were some illicit activities, but it's not because it's not because there is a lack of transparency. It's because it wasn't important enough to investigate and create that network to look at ledgers and things like that. So as its popularity has risen, we've seen in the last couple of years that regulators have looked into it and learned to read the ledgers. And of course, there's still some tricks and nooks where you can try to hide the money. But as the technology and as the familiarity of regulators with this cryptocurrency increases, they're able to retrace more and more through the ledger system, which is inbuilt into Bitcoin.
In reality, right? Bitcoin the transactions are pseudonymous, so it's not completely anonymous, but it is. You know that there is someone behind this transaction, and with anything on the internet, you can find ways to find the person's location. So if there's a illicit transaction, everyone can see that transaction. Everyone can see with a reasonable certainty from which area, from which sort of like IP address that transaction came through. And if they try to convert it to another currency, people can find out easily, because you'll have to go through an exchange, and all exchanges are centralized. So in fact, criminal activity is probably, this is the worst way to use Bitcoin, because people can actually track.
Yeah, and that actually, I heard someone mention to me the only way Bitcoin can stay anonymous is if a user holds his Bitcoin and he never transacts it. If he never transacts it, it never goes through the ledger system. So if he receives the money, and as long as he doesn't do anything with the money, he can stay anonymous. That's the caveat. But no illicit activity would happen where someone would use the money and not do anything with it. So that is a huge caveat with this system.
Yeah, and it's important to note that cash is actually the worst form of untraceable currency, because cash is essentially doesn't go through the system every time you pay someone, right? So criminals mostly use cash as opposed to crypto, unless they're stupid.
No, I think it's actually a pretty simple. It's actually a very simple thing to look at the statistics of how much percentage of Bitcoin is used for illicit or criminal activities, and how much percentage of fiat currency is used. 99.9% of all criminals in the world probably have no idea how to use Bitcoin in the first place, and all of them will be wanting to use something which is not on the internet and can be tracked. I mean, it's that simple. So the criminality aspect of it, I think, is a bogus argument, and I completely disagree with it.
Yeah, that's cool. So now moving on to the third objection. They're not in any particular order, but this one keeps coming up. This one actually is a bit tricky for me as well. But one of the things Bitcoin proposes to be is a form or a means of payment, right? Means of transaction. But in reality, no one actually now or in the foreseeable future use Bitcoin to transact. So no one actually sends money to each other for an exchange of value. Everyone just holds it, or hodls. Hodl is a common term now, right? So hold on to dear life. Everyone hodls it, and no one actually uses it. So what is the currency if it's not used?
I think one of the key points is that these days, paying for any transaction is really simple as taking your phone and tapping on a device. But what most everyday people don't realize is behind your currency and behind those transactions, there's an incredibly complex mechanism between private companies, government policies, and the whole economy as a whole. With respect to how the value of your currency is protected. So it's a very centralized system. Every time you go make a purchase, your banks charge a transaction fee, and there's a Visa or MasterCard take their cut as well. And so every single purchase you do around, there is a lot being degraded into traditional banking systems. Trying to explore the complexity of the current financial system is quite mind-numbing. And if once you go into that rabbit hole, and then you look at how we can make it better, cryptocurrency does seem like a lot simpler to use. And it really depends on the adoption, how fast it is adopted.
But regardless of how it compares versus centralized systems, the user behavior is such that no one's actually using it to pay each other. People are only using it to hoard or hodl, or get as much as you can. So the common complaint is this: because Bitcoin has this characteristic of number go up, right? The number keeps going infinitely, skyrocketing. It's not a sensible currency, because the US dollar is stable. If I give it to you, if I like buy an apple, and an apple costs like say 50 cents, tomorrow, day after, 1 month from now, you're reasonably sure that it costs 50 cents, right? So but
So
Bitcoin price goes up, so the value keeps changing, so no one's actually gonna use it to pay for things rather than hoard.
one of the good things that I've read on the internet, a little bit crazy, you might say, is why compare, or why do you value the value of Bitcoin? Why do you state it in dollar form? You don't look at Bitcoin in that sort of a dimension at all. It's not linked to the centralized financial system. It's a complete different entity in itself. So if you believe that you're going to live in that ecosystem, then stop comparing it to the traditional ecosystem. This needs to be an entity of itself and will have intrinsic value for the people who exchange within the block. And also for the usability of it, we know that it is, even though it's been what, 10, 15, maybe 20 years, that it's been 20 years, I think it's been in existence. You can still 13, yeah, okay, 13 years in existence, you can still say that it's pretty much in its nascent stages when you compare to traditional financial markets. And layer 2 protocols like the Lightning Network, etc., are still being built, are still being improved upon. Even companies like Block, that we've spoken about in our previous video, are actually developing ramp on and ramp offs and all of these things that are going to help in the adoption of Bitcoin. I think the end game for Bitcoin is to be like a coconut for a monkey. You can just pick it up and break it. If it has to think about how to crack it and how to get inside using some additional tools, it's not going to happen. People are just too dumb for that.
Yeah. So in addition to that, like it's not my thought, but this is the common answer to this objection of no one's ever going to use it, is that, again, Bitcoin is only like 13 years old, as you said, and it's going through the current phase. It's going through a phase of monetization. So it's going to take a few years, maybe a decade or so, by the time when almost all the people own a bit of Bitcoin around the world, where anyone buying or selling won't actually matter to the overall sort of price, because the volatility would have reduced considerably. And so right now it's not there yet, because it has a lot of like room to go for that to happen. So right now it's just like monetizing and getting to a value. In the future, it's going to be stable.
So anytime a new technology is adopted, there's a need that is being met. So with what we do traditionally with money, we go online to purchase, or we go to a small shop to purchase, or we send money overseas. So the adoption of Bitcoin will improve over time with the reduced volatility, but it will start seeping into one by one each traditional use of money. It could start with international transactions, because international transactions is where most people lose a lot on transaction fees, and it seems very simple with this Bitcoin network. So that could be the first step for Bitcoin in its acceptance. And then slowly it might be like in developing countries like El Salvador is a good example, where it's easy to roll it out to a bigger population with very little infrastructure support from a federal government. And it's just bridging the gaps of traditional monetary system. And then once it has a wider adoption, that's where it becomes a really commendable foe to the traditional
Also, with countries struggling with their currency, like you mentioned, El Salvador, but Venezuela, Zimbabwe, whose main currencies have gotten worthless right now, right? So they've all adopted US dollar, FII, so they actually use US dollar. But Bitcoin is another alternative, which they've actually started buying in these countries that are struggling. Lebanon is another
Great.
example.
I think the psychology of how people think about this kind of stuff is also important. You would have heard of Atomic Habits, the book. There's a concept in there that a 1% improvement in a system, a human or whatever, over 365 days causes an overall improvement of 37% in that year. And if you go by that, like micro improvements in an ecosystem over a huge period of time can be absolutely mad compounding. So I think we are seeing, if you just roll back time a little bit and step through Bitcoin's history one year at a time, you're going to see that it's actually been improving in terms of adoption, even if it's just 1% in a year. The number of people or the users are growing slowly. It won't be long when the network effect kicks in and you just have like a massive user base. And we've seen this actually before in the 2014 or 15, when there was a massive jump in the price of Bitcoin. You could see driving down the street that certain restaurants and coffee shops had actually put out banners and boards saying that Bitcoin is accepted in here. And there were some cash flow transactions that happened at the time, although because of the transaction per second of only 7 per block of Bitcoin, the scalability had been cut back. But we have seen that there is a hunger for adoption, and over time this will play out, I feel.
That brings me to the scalability point, because it's sort of synonymous to the people not using it. Bitcoin is not scalable compared to the traditional means of finances which we have with central banks and Visa, MasterCard, the traditional network. Bitcoin is very slow and cannot have that many transactions as much as the traditional finance.
Yep. So I think Visa has a capability of 55 or 56,000 transactions. On an average, they do 2,000 to 4,000. Whereas Bitcoin is 7 transactions per second. So there is a big difference with the way it's set up currently. So that's one downside of Bitcoin being adopted on a global scale.
Yeah. So that's true. And it's when Visa would get better over time, Bitcoin will actually get worse over time. So the more people come into the network and the more people transact, the number of the fight for blocks, like block space for validating transaction, would be more expensive. So it would increase the scalability problem as it goes, compared to Visa and MasterCard. But I think Mo, you mentioned it about layer 2 solutions, right? So the community has essentially solved the scalability problem with layer 2, or the Lightning Network, for example. For our viewers who don't know what layer 2 is, it's essentially you are not actually touching the blockchain for regular payments. You're using like independent apps to manage these payments, but finally the final transactions it could be between thousands and thousands of people would settle on the blockchain. So you wouldn't touch the blockchain for one-on-one transactions, but you would group a lot of transactions into one into one, and finally settle on a blockchain.
Is layer 2 adding another block into the block?
Kind of. So think of layer 2 as like a network of people, but they're not concerned with the blockchain. Blockchain keeps running, but say if you pay Mo $5, Mo pays me $5, I pay another person $5. Ultimately, when they decide to settle, it'll just be between you to that last person on the blockchain. So you can have thousands of people connected on layer 2, and the payments would be instantaneous. It would be way faster than Visa as well, right? But finally, the blockchain or Bitcoin blockchain will be the settlement layer that would solve the scalability problem.
That sounds interesting.
Most people don't notice it because when you pay for a coffee, like you get the coffee and the payment goes through immediately, at least on your phone, right? But you always see that pending sign on your phone when a transaction goes through. And essentially the reason is Visa and MasterCard, they're sort of gatekeepers, right? So they provide authentication between two different transacting parties to assure the user, to assure like the users involved that the funds are available. So when you pay me $5, Visa checks my account and be like, okay, yeah, $5 exists, but they don't actually take the money. It just checks the $5 exist, right? The actual money transfer between like that goes through the whole system, so it goes through the central bank and to the final merchant, actually happens days after, you know. So the settlement in traditional finance is what I wanted to say. The settlement actually happens days after the transaction has been complete. It's just a way of like showing that the transaction is complete, but the finality happens days later, which essentially is going to be the same with Bitcoin.
Exactly. And the finality then is it's like you can think of people putting apples in a basket, and at the end of the day, the basket changes hands. So it's like that's like the simplest way to put it. You don't have to take each apple and take it to the bank or to the source or to whoever. You keep collecting, and then at the end of the day, just bags exchange between houses. You can think of it that way.
Okay, cool. So let's move on to the next objection then. This one's a contentious one. I don't have an answer to it, but I have an explanation as usual. And the question of, will Bitcoin be hacked? So Bitcoin is a network. Bitcoin lives in the computer. It's synonymous to the internet. Websites get hacked all the time. Centralized companies get hacked all the time. Banks get hacked. Security agencies get hacked. Why will Bitcoin not be hacked? It hasn't been so far, but will it be hacked?
I don't believe so. Just because it's reached a point beyond which it's impossible for someone to have a 51% majority to orchestrate a brute force attack on the ledger. And
what is explain to the audience if what that means.
So basically, the Bitcoin network is established on the ledger. If every transaction that happens gets recorded on the ledger, and several nodes need to agree upon the transaction for it to be inputted into the ledger, and that's the security feature built into Bitcoin. That's what provides it the authentication, which generally a bank would do. But to change that, if 51% of all nodes within Bitcoin, or you can say if anyone can build a mining system that could provide 51% of all power for transactions or to record the ledger, they would technically be able to change the rules of the game, or even do double spend or just create Bitcoin out of thin air and stuff like that. But again, for that to happen, you'll need like there's research out there. Like at current scale, you would have to build a mega mining facility just to prove that you can hack Bitcoin. So I think for that reason, I don't think it's actually hackable in its current form.
Yeah,
people get scammed through wallets. The way wallets work is different though. I think wallets work with the public key, and it's the weaknesses in privately set up wallets that is what has exposed
centralized systems and the
centralized systems around the decentralized blockchain technology.
I think the biggest worry that people should have when they're holding a lot of Bitcoin is not actually getting hacked, but they themselves losing their hard wallet or forgetting their key and password to their accounts, etc. That probably is a much bigger risk than actually getting hacked.
Yeah, because it's essentially not recoverable. No one can fathom the idea that a password is not recoverable. This is literally not recoverable. Only
Yeah.
only you know, and if you tell someone, they know.
I mean, just think about all the stories we've heard, right? A guy, if you pick up newspapers, there's a guy who threw away his hard disk by mistake, which held like 6,000 Bitcoin or something, and crazy, like, imagine the amount of money. And he went crazy looking for it in the garbage pile of the city. And apparently the search is still on. He's still hoping to find it one day. And then the another person who went to psychologists after psychologists to try to get them to remove that key, which was somewhere the password in his head that he forgot to the account, which held many Bitcoin, etc.
Yeah,
It's like littered with these.
story.
Yeah.
I think it is a bit of paranoia that you want to keep it behind one single password.
Yeah. But what's going to happen is there are hard wallet companies, right? Soon they're going to be centralized custodians. So essentially a different form of a bank that are going to exist that won't control the money, but will hold on to your I would say private key, but would hold on to your access to your crypto or Bitcoin.
Actually, you really touched on an important point. One of the benefits of the traditional financial system is what you may not be aware of. Most banks are insured through another agency. So if a bank loses its money, there is someone who will pay back, whether it's through the government or it's a different regulatory body. So there is that insurance system built into the traditional banks. With Bitcoin, I'm not aware of such a system existing, except there's a ledger book to say, oh, you lost all this money, or this is lying stagnant there.
No, it is coming in the future. Like centralized custodians will exist, but they won't have as much power as like traditional banks have. But they'll do the job of a trusted third party for me, not for everybody, but for specific people, a trusted third party to hold on to or to access. It could be like an automated system. It could be a hard wallet like device, or it can be an actual company or a bank for larger people. In fact, like Coinbase and Binance and what's the other one, Gemini, they are like exchanges, right? But people are using it as custody. Like most retail crypto buyers hold on to their crypto on exchanges. They don't actually own the Bitcoin on hard wallets. None of us use hard wallets. We store it on Coinbase.
I actually have no idea how to move it from my Binance account.
Yeah, so
I didn't even know it was possible.
Yeah. So you don't own the crypto. Binance through you owns the crypto.
Yeah.
So we are essentially offloading the trust to Binance or Coinbase, which is not wrong. I mean, it's not wrong in our situation, but yeah.
I don't like the idea. I don't like the idea of exchanges at all. They are centralized. They really promote this culture of looking at Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as assets which will increase in value, and for just trading. Just the word exchanges, it just doesn't hold good in my view.
And the stable coins and exchanges, it's like deviating from the original agenda of decentralization, which is a brilliant point what you made, because it just directly goes to our next point, which is, why should Bitcoin succeed when there are like 1,000 different currencies that pretty much do the same job, similar job, better job out there? So we have Ethereum, the second competitor, Solana, we have Cardano, we have Dogecoin. Why, if Bitcoin is a technology and a new technology, wouldn't a better technology beat an existing technology?
Yes, it could. There's no reason why a Dogecoin might actually become the usable currency form that people actually start using in future, and Bitcoin dies into obscurity. But the reason why I think Bitcoin should be everyone's focus is because it has already achieved a level of decentralization that most other cryptocurrencies only dream of. because the founder holds so many bitcoins, and then they release it at their discretion, and it's already one person's tweet might sway it like completely or destroy it and crash it and burn it. So it's like so centralized when you think about it. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is probably still one of the most decentralized currency on the internet that you can get your hands on. Therefore, I think it's not that the other cryptocurrencies cannot succeed. I just feel that the focus of the people who want to move away from the centralized culture is better served if you actually look at Bitcoin only and forget all the fluff.
Just to add to that is that I think the whole cryptocurrency works around the demand and supply concept of it. All cryptocurrencies have the supply aspect of it very intricately set up, just to have the right amount of inflation and just the right amount of supply. But the demand is where it gets tricky. Bitcoin is the oldest player in the block. So they were the first to get off from the start line, and they're the first to get widely recognized. And the more it got recognized, the more investors started piling money into it, the more hedge funds started looking into it and started investing money in big amounts last year. So since a lot of people have started valuating this currency really highly, it has that upper edge. The supply constraints from each cryptocurrency is a difference in technology, but the demand is the biggest driver for this.
So Bitcoin already has that network effects in place that has got it to this size. So the statistical likelihood of someone else reaching and out competing Bitcoin becomes low, and continues to become low as Bitcoin grows, right? Because network effects are hard to form and destroy. Also, added to that, I wanted to point out, which is that all the other coins have teams in place, have engineers like founders who are managing the sort of technology. So they're creating the rules, they've defined the rules, they're creating the rules, they're sort of changing the rules as time goes on. Come on, like if you can do something, you will do something, right? You're constantly like tweaking it. So that doesn't sort of that works against this decentralized aspect completely, because if the rules can be changed, what's the point of decentralization, right? So Ethereum's rules constantly change. So Ethereum started with proof of work as the consensus mechanism. Now they're changing it to proof of stake. Haven't, but they will. They also, from time to time, have changed the supply as well, which sort of counteracts the decentralization aspect of it. Like, why bother with decentralization when a centralized team can change the rules? Bitcoin, on the other hand, doesn't have a centralized sort of manager, right? So the founders created it, and now they're gone. Now it all depends on consensus right now, and no one can really change the consensus rules. If you can change it, there's no reason you can't, but you would have to create a fork of Bitcoin. You have to create a copy of Bitcoin and trade as a separate currency, which is like all these other currencies. You can change the rules, you can make it better, whatever you can do with it, but you would have to. It won't be Bitcoin. Bitcoin will still continue.
I think the challenge really is depending on who you ask the question to. Some people want a bit of control to make sure it is run in as optimally as possible, and people who are people who don't like the traditional financial system, which is highly controlled and regulated, enjoy Bitcoin for its decentralization. So the different cryptocurrencies around the world which is set up, they all have varying levels of owner control in them. I think Bitcoin is on one end of the spectrum, which is completely, almost completely decentralized. And then there is other end of the spectrum with Ethereum and others which are privately controlled with their development and stuff like that. So it depends on the adoption, depends on how it's widely accepted.
And I also, to cap this point off, introduce a bit of paranoia here. I think that Bitcoin is actually being attacked. The decentralized revolution or the movement is being attacked by many known players who want to dilute the effect of cryptocurrencies and the decentralized finance as it exists. There are million reasons why powerful people and centralized authorities would not want this to be a reality, and it's not beyond comprehension that they introduce sort of Trojan horses within the crypto community to actually bring down the network effect of Bitcoin.
I think it's not paranoia because I think the federal governments like their control, and they are trying to correct some of their deficiencies through launching their own cryptocurrency. I'm not sure what it's called. I think fiat-based
CBDCs, the central backed digital currency.
Okay.
Even China has one already in circulation.
And there's a lot of countries which are trying to launch their own cryptocurrency of their currency. Australia has one, China has one, India has one. A lot of countries are having their own crypto version of their currency, but this is just for them to use it to make their transactions easier through the crypto network. But it will challenge, and I think the governments will try to force the hand, and that is a minor threat.
In fact, CBDCs, central bank controlled digital currencies, are probably the scariest form of money because people would adopt it because you wouldn't even notice it. But what essentially means that the central bank instantly controls every transaction goes through the central bank, through and are controlled on their ledgers. What that means is they can switch on and switch off anybody instantly, much easier than current, because currently it goes through banks and it goes through intermediaries, right? And it's not that easy. Central bank managed digital currencies are the most centralized that we can get.
It means that if Mo is convicted with a crime and he's proven guilty, the moment the banks know all his money is false, he's frozen out. All his cards are useless. He's just running with what he has on his back.
Yeah.
I'll be holding Dogecoin, so I'll be fine. I'll be holding a lot of Dogecoin and I'll be fine. Don't worry.
You have hoarded a lot of buried a lot of gold in your backyard, right? In preparation.
my proverbial backyard. Yes, my laptop.
Doge. Yeah.
But I do think that the community needs to come together and support or throw their support behind one or two main programs or cryptos or whatever you call it, so that this dream of decentralization can come true. Yeah. Instead of shifting focus every 2 minutes to look at Coin, Dogecoin, and everything. By the way, you guys know that the altcoin community is absolutely going to come and tear us down, right?
Cool. This is the next point is probably the biggest objection of Bitcoin is Bitcoin wastes a lot of energy. So for our viewers, just a quick point or introduction on that is Bitcoin runs on this consensus system known as proof of work. So essentially what it is in order for there are miners who create blocks, and every 10 minutes there is a block that gets created. But because Bitcoin cannot be just randomly given to someone, there needs to be a system to allocate new Bitcoin that comes into the system to someone. And this someone is the miners. And these miners expend a lot of energy to prove that they are worthy to get the reward, which is the Bitcoin. And in doing so, they're creating the blocks, and the blockchain keeps going on and on and on. So proof of work is this something that is consciously done, which means that they have to use a lot of energy, money, equipment, and power to enable the system to continue. And in doing so, Bitcoin ends up wasting a lot of energy, which is the problem. And people think that to create nothing, you're using energy equivalent to a city. Now it's as much as a small country.
Yeah. Ridiculous. I think that is, in my view, the biggest challenge that Bitcoin faces, because if you're going to be burning coal and oil and gas and absolutely polluting every river and every open air ecosystem that we hold dear just to mine some internet currency, I think that there's a huge flaw in that.
I think processing power is something which is constantly evolving. The processing power with computers and graphic units 10 years ago is not what it is in present day. And 10 years ahead in the future, the processing power is only going to be more advanced for every kilowatt of electricity consumed.
It actually won't reduce. Hear me out. So the idea is the usage of energy is written in the system. So even if you try to make it more efficient, so what would happen is if you make mining more efficient, more miners would want to do it. If more miners want to do it, Bitcoin, the difficulty adjustment would make the sort of mining harder, and make mining harder, meaning more people have to use more energy to or more computational power to generate new blocks. So in the future, it is written that it's going to be there's going to be more energy used. Now, the only counter to that would be to move to countries or move to locations where energy is very cheap. So when I say cheap, I mean like cost cheap, or where places have more renewable energy. You will still have to use a lot of energy, but through renewable means as opposed to traditional means. With the greener solution, one of the optimistic or sort of outlook of this is, and a lot of people keep saying this, that Bitcoin promotes research into renewables. And what that means is essentially because of the incentive of getting cheaper and getting more efficient, right now there is an incentive to promote, to start, or to like go completely renewable. So the amount of monetary energy going into the Bitcoin space will help renewables to get better, like solar and wind and geothermal and all of that will have there's a lot of need for it from private firms, not the government, from private firms, to make Bitcoin mining cheaper, which will benefit everybody because electricity is going to be wanted for cheap electricity would be wanted for everybody.
Just as a cynical view of all of this is, why do we care that Bitcoin uses so much energy? If you still look at the amount of energy that the United States and other developed nations use, the amount of energy that Bitcoin uses is still less than 1% of global consumption. I mean, we are probably falling into this trap of picking one small disincentive and ignoring the massive incentives that are available in adopting a technology.
I think when we decided to have electricity, we started polluting the planet, and when we started wanting to have automobiles to travel everywhere, we were polluting the planet. In comparison to all the other technologies we've released, Bitcoin would be a really small fraction of it, which might even offset some other benefits to how we do things, and indirectly it might reduce pollution.
The strong mental block with people when they think of abundance of energy. People think abundance of energy is bad for society because it creates pollution, it creates it's unsustainable, it's wasteful, and things like that. When in fact, abundance of energy actually creates progress. It's how you source the energy, and the cost of the energy is what matters. If you source it to renewables, if you have infinite energy, like insane amounts, like sun, right? The sun is like infinite energy, and it's always available. If you find ways to harness that energy, then who cares how much energy we use, right? It's actually better. More crazier things will happen in the world with more energy. Okay, so this comes up to our final issue or final objection with Bitcoin is Bitcoin is often compared with gold. However, the objection is Bitcoin has no inherent value. Like it's useless. It's just a number on a computer ledger. It doesn't mean anything. So if you're comparing it with gold, gold has intrinsic value. Gold can be made into jewelry. It can be used in industrial application. But Bitcoin is just vaporware. It's nothing.
So, for any currency to be valuable for transaction, it should have inherent value as an asset. When you pile up cash in a bank, that becomes like an asset. Gold was used for transactions, and because it is considered valuable, it's considered rare, and I think in that essence, Bitcoin does tick the boxes of when you compare it directly with gold. The only thing which is slightly different between gold and Bitcoin is gold is not only accepted from hundreds of years, gold forms part of federal government policy in terms of assets that they're regulated to keep. So one of the biggest consumers of gold is federal governments who have to maintain a set number of physical gold for each country. The second consumption is jewelry. So gold is a physical asset, which is both physically you can feel you know this is valuable, and also as a government policy you have to keep it valuable. Whereas Bitcoin is this unique piece of code, which people find it valuable just the same way I find a painting valuable or I find an antique valuable, but with its unique transaction capabilities.
And let me jump in here with another book recommendation, *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari. He explains this concept incredibly well. Throughout history, there's always been stuff that people collectively believe in, gods, stories, and all of that. But money it's such a revolutionary thing when it came about, because money is the only thing whose inherent value depends on not you personally believing in it, but other people believing in it. For example, gold to some ancient Göbekli Tepe civilization is nothing. They would say, "What is this rock that you're giving me? Shiny rock for stuff that I actually hold dear, like apples." But it's the fact that other people know that it's valuable is what spreads the usage of it, and then to a global scale that we see today. So I think Bitcoin is in a similar territory where now a majority of other people believe that there is value in it. It doesn't matter you think it's worthless. It doesn't matter if you think it's a number on a computer. Somebody wants to pay you $50,000 for that number on a computer, you're going to give that away, right? And you're going to get money in return. So inherently that builds value in that system by others believing in it.
Yep. So gold historically has, since it's been there for like thousands of years, it historically has been a great way of holding value and a way of paying people. So obviously pre-digital, pre-internet days, there wasn't a better way to transact. Like gold, even though it can be made into coins are still heavy. Coins can't be transacted through large geographic areas and all that. But because gold was scarce and there's not a lot of gold available, and it takes a lot of energy mining, so it takes a lot of energy to get the gold, it was a perfect store of value and a monetary sort of currency to use. So Bitcoin takes the same attributes of gold, makes it better. So it's divisible, it's transferable, it's scarce. But all of this has been programmed into code. It's programmed and made into this piece of software to have all the elements and better elements of gold. Obviously, gold can be made into jewelry, but really the value of gold has been historically not because it's a shiny piece of metal that looks good, but actually because of its characteristics to be money. So some amazing engineers have done that through Bitcoin by creating the elements that make gold awesome and into a piece of software.
I think we give too much credit to gold for being a stability store or whatnot. People think that all currency is actually backed by gold. The truth is, 1933, the US moved away from the gold standard. Richard Nixon made it official. So all fiat currency currently in circulation is just money printed out of thin air. And another myth about gold being stability is that when it was gold backed, people think that the economies were stable. It's not true. When economies were gold backed, they still had recessions, they still had crashes, they still had all of the problems that we face today.
What happened in 1971 was Nixon officially took out fiat or the currency out of the gold standard, but this trend started from pre-World War One. So they were playing around with the currency and not having the same amount backed in gold in the reserves.
Yes.
So they started tampering, and the reason they started tampering with the currency is because they had to fund the World War. So it started happening.
They had to print money.
They had to print money to fund the First World War. So it started in 1914. I think 1911 or 1914, and that's why there were multiple depressions and recessions after that. There was one in the 30s, right? And then there was multiples after.
I think one of the key drivers was that there wasn't enough gold to back all the currency in liquidation, and that's why they realized it created this constraint of how much money you could print. And that meant that they had to go for this highly regulated currency system, which we have today, and all the recessions we've had since we started playing around with it, because it's a really, really complex system, and you turn one knob, it blows the valves on something else, and this is every year. The federal government's Reserve Bank, anytime there's an economic movement, and they try to control it, and then it's just like no one perfectly knows how to do it, turn the right knobs to make sure your currency holds on to its value.
Agreed. And therefore, I think the comparison of Bitcoin to gold should not occur, because Bitcoin is living.
It is very hard. Very hard.
It's not hard. It's not an easy comparison though. It's.
I think it shouldn't be a comparison at all. Bitcoin exists, like I said earlier, in its own ecosystem, and it should not be compared to other means of currency or value holding at the moment.
But the problem is to an outsider, like listening to this, and you're saying Bitcoin is digital gold, right? You automatically go in that train of thought, like, listen, gold is physical, it is jewelry, it is valuable.
It's the same psychological issue with us, all as humans. We try to relate anything new to what is already come and gone, when in reality it might be completely different, and we don't know how the ecosystem can evolve over time. It doesn't have to be backed, like you don't have to think of Bitcoin like a gold bar or something that can be exchanged for only for services and other goods. It could have other use cases, plenty of other use cases.
Yeah, who no one ever uses gold, right? People just hoard it and bury it in their backyards, under their pillow, in their mattress. You can't even use it. What would you use it for apart from jewelry? Bitcoin at least has an option, like people are building things to make it a medium of exchange as well as a value store. So we went through, I think, roughly all the points or the objections that keep coming up. I hope we did justice in explaining our opinions, as well as some of the common knowledge that exists in the Bitcoin community. What I wanted to also bring up is it isn't to say that we completely or 100% believe in it, or we think it's risk free, or we think that these answers to the objections are completely valid. Bitcoin is essentially extremely risky. There's a good chance it might not actually be anything in the future, but it's important for everyone to try and understand or dig a little deeper to these objections and not just like brush it off, research, read more about it, and understand why these questions come up and what it means. So that's it, guys. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up this amazing episode?
I'll give a final thought from me. For me, there is a community out there that thinks that Bitcoin is actually not what the blockchain is about, and you need to focus more on the underlying technology, which is the blockchain, the immutable ledger. So that technology to me is here to stay, irrespective of Bitcoin being here or not. Technology is everywhere, and it's going to keep compounding in our lifetime.
Can I give a counter to that?
Mm-hmm.
This is in this book, right? So it's got the Bitcoin Standard. It's a quite an interesting book if you want to get into like the economic side of it more than the technology. But one of the fallacies that he says that exists currently is about blockchain. Like, blockchain is fascinating, yes, but essentially blockchain is not an answer to most problems, right? Most problems are well suited to be solved by centralized bodies. Like if you want to stream, you don't want a streaming service to be decentralized. You don't want your name your service to be email service to be completely decentralized.
True.
It's more efficient if it is centralized. That's why you have these amazing companies that make things cheaper, faster, better, because it's centralized. Decentralized is inefficient, decentralized is costly, and decentralized is slow, right? So blockchain, although is fascinating, might not be suited for most problems unless there's a question of trust. Trust and the blockchain go hand in hand. If you want to establish no trust or zero trust, then you have a decentralized blockchain system, which helps it. That's the argument. True. I don't believe it. That's the argument that he puts.
No, I think I kind of agree with it, but that the trust factor of it, right, comes into play when you are involving personalities within the blockchain. I was speaking of blockchain's use in the autonomous future, where a grid of robots or a grid of artificially intelligent beings can interact with each other, and trust is inherently present in all of these. So that kind of a future blockchain might be trust. Very, very correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So in that direction, I think blockchain has a good hold. But for humans to use, maybe, yeah, you're right. Like for our own consumption, we don't want Netflix to be a decentralized entity where anyone can post one episode of Game of Thrones comes from one person and then the other one comes from another person. We don't want that.
And no one ever would agree to change the rules, and Netflix will be the same. They'll be sending DVDs to your home.
True. Okay, Blake, you got any last digs? You want to jab some Bitcoin?
I think we managed to convert Blake. Today he is all about crypto. Otherwise he thinks...
I know, right?
Yeah,
wow.
I think...
I'm not against crypto, but I'm against fairy tales and storytelling about what the would-be future is. From a business point of view, as I had touched on earlier, Bitcoin has value in certain industries and sectors. Once you shed the bad light you give to Bitcoin, it could be useful for some fundamental uses like international transactions or really important secure financial transactions, like from a government point of view. If you take baby steps to its adoption, then it has an organic growth. Because as per the white paper, as Hansel mentioned, of Bitcoin was never designed to take over the world. It was meant to bridge the gap which is created by traditional financial systems, especially in developing countries and where centralization of currency has big issues. So baby steps. Let's see where Bitcoin goes next, and let's support it. Let's give it a hand, but let's not lift it up and raise it to the sky.
Awesome. Cool. On that note, that's it. Episode number 6. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.
See ya.